hackers and against the nasty leakers. They're all being branded in together. So I just mention that as one little tiny thing, because this is one thing that he said this was going to happen, and look at what's happened. He also told me about the plans for the false flag ET threat setup. He didn't tell me anything about how it would happen. He didn't know. He didn't know how this would do. So this theatrics I talked about the TR-3Bs hanging over Manhattan, that's just my own idea, is to show what could happen. He said this is real. He was emphatic that this was on the cards.
Okay.
The last thing that he said would happen, he said, well, no, actually, not the last thing. He said that there was going to be the probability of some extreme solar activity that, as best he knew, was being forecast for something like 2013, and this is all in the public domain.
Right.
And he said this is something that none of the controllers on planet Earth are going to be able to do anything about, because this is a huge natural phenomenon happening out there that can't be prevented or can't be stopped, but they're going to take advantage of it when it happens, just like they took advantage of the WikiLeaks thing. If anything happens out there in the environment in which they're operating, they seize on this to take advantage of it in order to further whatever agenda they had. So that's something that he drew my attention to. The last thing is the plans to reduce the world population. And he said that this will be done through the control and the distribution of food. He said that there will not be a nuclear war. He said that this is off the table. This will not happen. And there are interesting reasons for that. But he said that the reduction of the world's population was going to happen through the control and distribution of food, and this had been set up for many years beforehand by the introduction of genetically modified crops. And when they've got all the pieces in place, then metaphorically they turn off the switch, and that turns off the food supply.
I would add water.
Yeah, sure. I mean, all of these things are part of this mix, but by controlling the weather, by controlling the law, by controlling distribution, by controlling other factors, they can actually move these huge infrastructure vectors around in order, basically, to control who lives and who dies. And he was absolutely adamant that this was planned, had been planned for a very long time. He believed it was almost unstoppable. I don't necessarily believe that myself at all, but he, like many people who have been on the inside, they spend so much time in the physical company of people who are sure of their ground and sure of their plans. And as George Green famously told us a couple of years ago, he said, they think they've already won. I ran this past my contact, and he said, that's absolutely right. They think that they've won. And it is part of their protocol or the rules of engagement or cultural requirements, whatever words you want to put on this, to leave the signs of what they're doing out in the open for those who are smart enough to pick them up and see. They have to do that. He's told me this a dozen times now. He says, they have to do it. They have to do it. They're required to do it somehow. Everything is in plain sight. But you've got to be smart and you've got to be aware and you've got to be well informed in order to put all the pieces together. And from their point of view, that's our problem, not theirs. And so this is something that he assured me was planned. When I asked him for a timetable, again he said these things are
event-driven.
Sequence-driven. They're sequence-driven. They're event-driven. They're not calendar-driven.
Right.
He did say to me that these things that we'll know pretty much one way or the other, whether we've lost this giant Super Bowl game or not, in the next 5 or 6 years, and the implementation of this plan, they figure, should be complete within the next decade or so. 2012, he said it's a whole distraction. He said it's theatrics. He told me that mind control on a kind of population controlling basis was more advanced than we would ever want to believe. And he said that certain individuals were just basically controlled like puppets. Their technology for doing this, and I don't know exactly what the technology is. This is one of the details which I need to understand better. But the technology is very, very advanced for controlling the thinking of large groups of people as well as directing the thinking of individuals. And all of this is part of a big push. And what they're doing, the reason why they're doing this is because they are trying to optimize the human race. They want to optimize the human race. Just like the farmer wants to optimize their breed of cattle, or the forest keeper wants to optimize the population of the deer by allowing the weak or the elderly or the infirm deer to die out, and maybe shooting certain deer but not others, in order to control the herd, which makes it stronger and more viable. What this man has told me is that these people who are controlling the rollout of all of this absolutely believe that they are doing the responsible and right thing. They're not sort of a caricature of some kind of crazy, evil Dr. Strangelove character twirling their moustache and planning the next dastardly deed. They're not like that. They believe that they're doing the best for the human race. And the reason why they believe they're doing the best for the human race is because their ethics is a different kind of ethics. They're not concerned about individual people. Just like the farmer isn't concerned about individual cattle, and the forest keeper isn't concerned about the individual deer. They're concerned about the herd. They're concerned about the genetic line that they've got. And these people are trying to optimize the DNA of the human race. And this is why they don't want to have a nuclear war. Because a nuclear war, if you drop a few nuclear bombs all over the place, they wipe people out indiscriminately. They wipe out the good stock and the bad stock. It's like trying to cull the deer in the forest by dropping a cluster bomb in the middle of the forest. You don't actually get rid of the deer that you want to get rid of. It's not selective. The reason why they want to minimize reduce the human population through the distribution and supply of food is because the problems that will arise will result in the survival of the smartest, the healthiest, those who've anticipated the problem, those who are best able to survive in groups, those who are best able to improvise, those who are good at troubleshooting problematic situations, and everybody else isn't going to go through that filter. And so what they want as a result of this is to end up with a human genome that's leaner and meaner and better able to survive, but at the same time can be more easily controlled. That's what they want. I've been specifically told this. And I find that I can believe it, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I believe it's going to happen, but it makes a dreadful sense. It makes everything fit.
It sounds like a bit like the upgrade to Auschwitz.
Yeah.
Hey, I do have a question from Richard, who is the administrator of Project Avalon and helps with the website, the forum. And he says, and I guess we're going to drill down into the solar question. He says, has there been any insider buzz about the unusually active solar activity in the coming years that may cause Earth some serious problems?
All that I know is that my contact told me that there were, no, let me start that sentence again, that some kind of extreme solar activity was being prepared for as an external event that could only be prepared for and not stopped. His personal buzz was that this was expected in something like 2013, but he didn't really know. And there's something I need to say here is that my contact isn't a scientist. He isn't an academic, and he isn't a historian.
Is he military?
His role is quasi-military. He's not actually in the services. You could describe his role as like being logistics, security, and quasi-military. So, but he's not a scientist. So there are 101 questions which I wanted to ask him, which he just didn't know the answers to because I was asking him data-based and scientific-based questions, and he did not have those answers. On the inside, people are informed on the need to know as well as we understand, and there are lots of things which he didn't need to know. He just needed to know just enough for him to do his job. And so there's much, much more to this story which I've just outlined. There's a lot more to that story, which I'm not in a position to talk about yet, simply because I don't understand it well enough. But in terms of practical, what can I call it? Practical situational things to watch for, be on guard against, and depending on one's philosophy, to work in whatever way we can do to influence, to change, then my personal belief right now is that what I was sketching out, that's pretty real. I believe that's pretty real in terms of threats. I don't think that this is going to transpire. I really don't. But what I do know is between now and, let's say, I don't know, in the next handful of years, I think you and me and everyone listening to this, we've got to do a lot of stuff in order to wake people up enough so that these things cannot stick. And there's some good news among all this. He told me, for instance, that the whole swine flu, bird flu vaccination thing, that those plans had been shelved because people had woken up so quickly and there was so much activism and protest, and which even flowed into the mainstream media, and ordinary people who'd never protested against anything in all their lives were starting to, read the leaflets and talk to their neighbors about this stuff. Everything was happening last year. He said that, okay, they've gone on to a different tack now. You see, so our response can make a difference. And he cited that as an example of something which had been shelved because the response was more vocal and more active and more aware than anyone had anticipated. And so that's a good model for us. It's a good model because it worked.
Yeah.
That's good. Morning Sun has a question, Bill. He's asking, what about the ground crews? Should we still be organizing survival groups?
What a great question. I think there's a real role for the ground crew movement. I really do think that. I don't know how they should be organized. I don't know how they should be, what they should call themselves. But the idea of community groups who can work together to support each other if things get a little bit tough, it's a pretty smart idea. And what has happened, of course, it's linked with what I was talking about an hour ago when I said, well, you know what, we were all really worried back in 2008 that there was going to be a real problem. We needed to get ourselves organized quick. And then nothing really happened. There was a whole scare about the swine flu. The ground crews swung into action and started leafleting and informing people and blogging and telling the public. And